Will saving for retirement before age 40 make you miserable?
Brian, this one is interesting to me, right? And you notice I didn't say that I'm excited because I'm not as excited when we talk about stuff that just seems like tomfoolery. And if you've been listening to our show for any amount of time, you know that we love saving. We think it's a great thing. So how on earth could we have an article come out that says that saving, especially for young folks, will make you miserable?
I know we're hitting on something out there with you guys when articles like this are dropped and you guys hit us up on Facebook, on Twitter, and say, Money Guy team, come on, give me some feedback on this, because I love that you come to us to kind of decipher how in the world could such smart people put out something so ridiculous.
Sure.
So let's kind of jump into this. First of all, if you want to know what all the hubbub is about, it's that there's a research group called the National Bureau of Economic Research. That sounds fancy. They came out with a paper titled, Is Automatic Enrollment Consistent with a Life Cycle Model? Now, life cycle model in their terms kind of means happiness, in full, taking into account everything.
That sounds like an enthralling article that I could not wait to pour into.
Well, this was covered. This research report, written in the small print on the right, you can see from the screen here, but it was really covered and kind of everybody started paying attention when Business Insider and Hillary Hoffauer covered this. And this is what blew it all up, is everybody was like, oh my goodness, there is a lot of academics that are actually saying, hey, wait until you're in your 40s. In your peak earning years, that's when you should save for retirement. So I kind of want to jump into this. And by the way, if you were just curious on how smart these researchers were, all you had to do was turn to page 6 of their research report, and you'll see they have an entire of your 8.5 by 11 page, half of it is this crazy formula that Einstein would be very happy with.
Yeah, it looks, I'm not going to lie, that looks pretty complicated, and I like to consider myself even a math guy.
I would need Elon Musk to help me figure out what the heck this means. But look, with something so fancy, so smart, what in the world could be wrong here? And I'm going to go ahead, because I don't want you guys to waste a second of your time reading this research report.
Sure.
I did it for you. But I will tell you, I'll go ahead and give you the Cliff Notes version. These are the 3 factors on why they rationalize why you should have zero retirement savings in your 20s and 30s. And this is what they had. Number 1, and they said this in really nerdy, fancy way. Number 1 is in the presence of borrowing constraints. What the heck does that mean? I'll tell you what it means. They're worried you're going to be so poor in your 20s and 30s that this forced savings, because remember, the whole premise of this research report is automatic enrollment consistent with good management and happiness. And so number 1 is they're worried about you getting in credit card debt because you're saving money.
So because you're saving, it's going to cause you to exacerbate your lifestyle, go rack up credit card debt.
Yeah, because you went and took that free money from your employer, because they're talking about employer retirement plans, and a lot of plans. QACA came out a number of years ago, which was legislation that encouraged employers, hey, do auto-enrollment on your employees so we can increase participation, because we think saving for retirement is a good thing. So this is a counterpoint to that. Number 2 is near zero real interest rates lower the cost of current consumption relative to future consumption. That's a fancy way of them saying, hey, what are the impacts of us having a Federal Reserve that's keeping interest rates dragging at zero, so you're actually not making money on your investments? My problem with this is that, and this is the rate of return they use in their research reports, 0 and 3%. I mean, that's that bothers me, because I had this question. This actually came up in one of our meetings yesterday.
Okay.
Great client who also listens to and watches a lot of our show. He's also a content creator, part of the FIRE movement. And we were talking about the anticipated rate of return in the future. And there's a lot of new research. People are going out there and making hay with the fact they're saying, we're only going to grow at 2, 3, 4, at most 5% a year because of how robust things have been in the past. I always ask people, before you're willing to hook your caboose to that train, ask yourself, do you feel like innovation is accelerating or is it slowing down?
Sure.
There is no way. I mean, I was watching a Today Show yesterday. 3 vaccines within a year from when the COVID
virus
came onto our
shores
shores here in America. We have 3 vaccines that are going out there. How in the heck is that possible without innovation?
Sure.
If you look at all the things, I mean, you can't tell me what I'm going to have in my pocket in 7 years, meaning from iPhones or smartphones, whatever technology is going to be driving things. So I don't know that I think interest rates necessarily impact it. And that leads to number 3 of their point of why you don't need to save, is that a lot of people, there's a high Social Security replacement rate that can rationalize lower savings at all ages.
So because there's going to be a social safety net there for everyone, we don't have to save as much for the future.
Well, we all know Social Security, even though the majority of the public uses Social Security, nobody actually thinks they're going to get Social Security.
Sure.
So that's kind of a very concerning thing. And I want to just read the last kind of statement from the conclusion of the research report. So once again, to save you the time so you don't have to do this yourself, our results suggest that nudging people to save for retirement at all points of their career may be inconsistent with a life cycle model, aka happiness. In such a model, it is not optimal for someone whose earnings are temporarily low, such as college graduates at the start of their career, to save for retirement. How could such brilliant people blow this up? And here's what I found. Remember, their goal was to see if automatic enrollments in employer-provided retirement plans with matching was causing people to be unhappy and also increase their debt. The fundamental flaw, I think, is that even though they were looking at employer plans, they didn't actually use employer plan investment options. Like there was no index funds. There was no target retirement funds. They assumed you were either going to make 0% because interest rates are low,
Sure.
or on the high, and I have to use the rabbit ears, high, 3%, but they even mitigated that because they said inflation was going to be 2% in their research report. So you're either losing money when it's at 0,
Right.
or you're making 1%.
1%.
Guys, if that was where we were with the power of your army of dollar bills, nobody would save for the future. We'd all spend like a bunch of knuckleheads.
Sure.
I mean, so you can see how they built the bridge to get there, but how in the heck do you build this bridge with the fundamental flaw? You didn't even use the products, the investment vehicles that people actually use to save money with. So this is a bridge too far. And I want to just show you, because I feel like it's spitting in the face of the 3 components of what creates wealth. The first component, discipline.
Yep.
How many times do we tell you guys you've got to live on less than you make? And you do that through discipline, through deferred gratification. That discipline and deferred gratification leads to the second component, is that you actually have margin. It creates money. That money is then put into the markets. It's invested into this ever-expanding global economic growth. And then it gives it time. The third component is time. You give it enough time to grow and compound. It doesn't grow linearly. It grows exponentially. And we have a slide that shows you how powerful that is.
Yeah, so you've seen this before if you've listened to the show. We like to talk about how much is required if you want to be a millionaire by age 65. And what's remarkable is that the earlier you save, the less you have to save to get to millionaire status. So for a 20-year-old, they only need to save about $95 a month to be a millionaire by the time that they get to 65. If you wait until 40, you have to save $780 a month to get to millionaire status by the time you get to 65. Or if you wait till 50, you have to save almost $2,500 a month. So this shows at early ages, it requires much lower levels of saving to get to that same level of wealth, because in your 20s, 95% of that $1 million that you've accumulated is from growth, is from earnings, is from your army of dollar bills doing what your army of dollar bills can do.
So their premise, remember, this is directly from the research report, labor market earnings at age 25 are only 42% of peak earning at age 45 or 50. So they're saying since you're poor while you're in your 20s and 30s, don't even worry about saving, because you'll just catch it up because you'll have your peak earning years in the future. I'm telling you guys, if you look at this chart, 20-year-old, 95% of their $1 million is coming from the growth of their army of dollar bills. For a 30-year-old, 89% is coming from the growth. If you do what these super smart knuckleheads tell you to do, you will actually miss out on all that exponential growth, and that is just less than ideal because I want you to put your money to work so it can grow. So we got with FTE Daniel, and we said, Daniel, let's knock the leather off this ball. Let's show them why this is wrong. I want them to actually go home and actually realize, man, next time we do a research report that gets into the fundamentals of building your army of dollar bills, we better think twice because this thing's we're going to get hurt. So here's what we came up with.
So here's the case study that we put together. Let's assume that you're that person that waits until 45. You want to wait till your peak earning years, and then you can start saving aggressively. Let's say in those peak earning years, you make $80,000 per year. And let's say from that $80,000, you contribute 6% of your salary, and you get an employer match of 3%. So you have 9% of your total compensation going into your retirement accounts. By 65, you will have accumulated almost $340,000, which isn't too shabby. All you did was save about $96,000, but your retirement accounts are worth about $340,000. Doesn't sound too bad. That's what this article is proposing you ought to do. So if you wait till 45, that's sort of the behavior that you could carry out.
Before you flip the slide, so realize by 65, you will have saved of your money $96,400, but it would have grown. The employer match plus the growth of your armies would have created $339,000. That means you would have put in 28% of the money of what that total 339, and that means the growth in your employer was 72%. Keep those two numbers. 72% of the money was still growth and from your employer. Let's see what happens to the younger person and what their results are.
So if we know that in our early years we make less than we do in our peak years, let's
42% according to this research report.
Let's assume that somebody at 25 years old makes 42% of what their 45-year-old self would make, and they make $33,600 per year. Well, they too are going to like to save 6% into their 401k, and they're going to get a 3% employer match. So they also have 9% going in on their behalf. By age 65, that person will have $838,000, even though they had only themselves saved about $81,000 over that time.
Now, look, I wanted to show off when we did this study is that we chose 33,600 because that was exactly 42% of the 80,000 we used for the 45-year-old. Because remember, that's peak earning years. But we did one better. We gave 0 pay raises to this individual, meaning they never made $1 more than 33,600.
Sure.
They only had to put in 6% to get their employer match. So that's it. And here's the other thing, guys, that this is fundamentally flawed, and it showed me that these super smart researchers or academics knew nothing about the tax code either. You guys realize that if you're a married couple and your household income is less than $65,000, you qualify for what's called the Savers Credit. So you can actually create where everything you put into this retirement plan potentially could give you a tax credit, not a deduction, a tax credit that will actually lower your income taxes so you actually make money off of the transaction of saving. The government has incentivized you to save. So not only did they not use investment vehicles, they also didn't take into account the tax code. This thing is building, but let's even show how it's worse because your army of dollar bills actually work. So you can see $837,000 is what your money becomes. I think it's interesting that you've only contributed $80,800. That's 9.6%. Essentially 10% is from you, 90% is from your employer and from your army of dollar bills and compounding growth. And look how much more money you have. You have almost $1 million. You're right under $900,000, whereas the 45-year-old, the Epicurean that waited until they were 45 before they started saving because some super fancy research report told them, hey, enjoy today. Don't worry about that great, big, beautiful tomorrow. They only have $339,000. Who do you think is going to have more happiness through life?
That's the question I'd ask: is who would you rather be, the person with a retirement pot of money of $340,000, or the person with a retirement pot of almost $40,000?
So here's the closing point. We get a lot of comments on our channel, And I love it. If you want to know the rocket fuel for the future, is when I get a comment saying, man, I just discovered you guys. Where were you when I was in my 20s? Where were you? If I could have just seen this ought to be played to every high school student in America. And look, these are some of the screenshots I had the team put together. I have a whole bunch of people that tell us, I wish I'd have found you guys earlier so I could have started doing this in my 20s and 30s. I have yet to find a successful people. And I'll even say we work with a whole bunch of successful people. I've never had somebody that says, you know where I screwed up, Brian? I wish I'd have never started saving in my 20s. I should have waited until I was in my 40s. You know why? Because they'd never be clients. You wouldn't have money. I hate to get so emotional about it, but I just hate when people come up with content like this. And I don't know if it was just to get the clicks, to get the eyeballs, because being a contrarian sometimes can get you more attention than being the smooth selling, actually telling people the truth. And I think, truthfully, that's where we've had issue, is that we're too honest with you guys. If we were much more sensational, we'd probably have more clicks, more subscribers, more views. But I'm not going to do that because I'm more concerned at making sure you build, just taking a little bit of today so you can have, all the exponential growth and get that great, big, beautiful tomorrow in the future. Just take a little bit of today, you'll get that awesomeness in the future, but you just have to listen and do what we tell you.
Yeah, I think a big takeaway you ought to take from this is be careful trying to seek out articles or viewpoints or ideas that reinforce something you want to believe, right? We see this with dietary stuff all the time that, hey, there's a new diet and all I've got to do is eat ice cream every day and I'm going to lose 50 pounds because a research report said that was going to happen. We all know that there are a few things you have to do if you want to become more healthy, if you want to lose weight, if you want to whatever. Personal finance is no different. We know that there are a few things that you have to do to set yourself up for success. Don't let the world, don't let the financial noise try to create an idea in you that there's some other way, there's some other magic bullet, because I just don't think that there is.
Hey, when did it say I should eat that ice cream?
I know, right? That's a good, I made that one up. I'd sign up for that one. Okay, hey, let's answer some questions. Obviously, we do this show every other Tuesday where we can answer your questions. So if you have some questions, start getting them rolling into the chat right now. We've got the team all around us dropping them in here, and we're going to see if we can't load you guys up. Okay, so this first one is from Siren Eye, and this is what Siren Eye said. They said, I'm 37. Throwing money into a backdoor Roth 401k at $57,000 per year. So this person is like a hyper saver. Currently, that account's at $106,000.
Okay. So wait, you doing a backdoor Roth contribution or doing the mega?
It sounds
Roth
like they're doing
conversion strategy?
It sounds like they're doing a mega backdoor Roth since
Okay.
they mentioned the 401k and they're doing the $57,000. Sounds like they're maxing out their 401k at $57,000. They currently have $106 in there. I make $150,000 a year and I live on $40,000. So high income, low living expenses. The only asset is my paid for car. And this is the question: should I diversify my portfolio by owning a home? And I think that's really the crux of the question. There's a lot of details in there, but we get this all the time. Hey, I've got this going on, and I'm a good saver, and I've been renting, but, should I go buy a house? Should I, for the purpose of investment reasons, or because I'm supposed to, or because that's what the manual on how to live life says, should I go buy a home for that reason?
I think all use assets. I'm talking about now. Use assets include your primary residence, your vehicles, that type of product these are assets that go on your net worth statement, but you don't really they don't create income for you. It's something that you're using for shelter and so forth. The good benefit of a house compared to like the other things like the vehicles I mentioned or household goods is that it actually appreciates, whereas the others actually depreciate and lose value over time. So that definitely is a good thing that you actually get some appreciation when you buy a house. There are some things you need to make sure you check the box on from a happiness factor as well as life factor to know if this is a good decision for you. First of all, do not buy any type of real estate, whether it's rental property, a use asset like your primary residence, unless you plan on holding it for a long time, because real estate by its sheer nature is very illiquid.
That's right.
I mean, you guys know, whenever you buy any type of real estate, there's appraisals, You've got to get attorneys involved.
Often commissions on both
there's
sides
commissions.
of the transaction.
There's a lot of recording fees and state stamps and so forth. Title insurance. These are all. It's not a process that you can go in and at 10 o'clock, if you decide, you know what, I think I want to sell this property today, by 1 o'clock, you're not going to have that transaction complete. It's going to take weeks, if not months. So with that understanding, I tell people, do not buy any type of real estate unless you can be there. I think it's a 7-year decision at a minimum.
Yep.
Because you got to cover the fees. Now, look, a few of you go right probably in the comments, I did it in 3 years. You got lucky.
Yep.
I mean, because we're in a highly appreciating market right now, probably some inflationary pressure going on. Don't always assume luck is going to bail you out of situations. That's what we're trying to plan for all things that are coming towards you. And then, so that's the financial part but what about happiness? I think if you have a job that you're going to be in that area, you're not moving for 7-10 years, and you like owning, the thought of owning this house, improving it, making it better, knock yourself out, go do it. But it's not a magic bullet for everybody. I mean, that's the biggest thing.
Yeah, and I wouldn't do it strictly for the portfolio purposes of it. I mean, I was talking to one of our team members yesterday who's new to the area, and he was talking to me. He's like, hey, I really don't want a single-family home. Earlier in life, I did the thing where I cut the grass and I did the weed eating. I think I want to move into like a condo or a townhome or something where I don't have to worry about that. And that's going to be great. You have to figure out what makes sense for you, not what you think society thinks you should do as it relates to, oh, well, now it's, I've checked this box and this box, this one, now I need to go buy a home. It should be much more about what your ultimate goals are. Because even all your portfolio is a mechanism to help you do the things you want to do when you want to do them, the way you want to do them. So the decisions you make should all move in that line. If home ownership isn't part of that, I wouldn't try to use home ownership as a means to get you to that.
Plus, somebody who's saving $57,000, $58,000, whatever the annual limit is, they are definitely a financial mutant.
Sure.
And I got to believe their army of dollars is going to build to the point that it definitely provides financial independence. This is just kind of a cherry on top of maximization. So if you definitely are growing roots in the community, you think you want to tie down. Because the other thing I do like about owning a house, I've made some great friends throughout life from neighbors.
Of course. Yep.
Because, I mean, there is something, I'm a neighbor person. I'm not, there's always this temptation. You want to go buy 50 acres, and have some animals on there. That's not me. I want to roll the trash cans out there and then yell over at the neighbor, and say, hey, how things going? Talk to them, so that, I don't know. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing.
In my head, I just saw you as like Cousin Eddie in like the boxer shorts and the robe, wheeling the trash can out. Hey, neighbors.
But I made great friends. I mean, every time if I could tell you a side effect or a silver lining in this pandemic, was I am closer to every one of my neighbors around me because we're all home more. There's nobody traveling. And also when we had a huge snowstorm here recently. We didn't lose power, fortunately, but we couldn't use the roads.
Yep.
Guess what we did? We hung out with neighbors.
Love it.
It's a great opportunity.
This next question, this is a YouTube question. This is from Jacob S. He says, does the FOO, the Financial Order of Operations, change if I want to retire at 50? I'm 26, maxing Roth IRA, Roth 401k, and HSA, but have little for taxable account contributions. Is it too early to be concerned about this? So he has two questions that he's asked. The first is, if I want to retire early, say 50, does FOO change? Second one is, I'm 26. I'm on the front end of my career. I'm at the beginning. Should I be thinking about that piece of the puzzle yet?
No, look, I'm going to tell you, I think FOO works even for FIRE folks because guess what? Step number 7 of our 9-step process of the Financial Order of Operations. Step number 7 is hyperaccumulation.
Yep.
Hyperaccumulation's entire purpose is now you've made it through the basics of, going through them really quickly. Deductibles covered, employer match, high interest debt is vanquished, emergency reserves, maximizing that tax-free growth of Roth IRAs, health savings accounts, and then you're also picking up anything else that's left out there with your employer max out retirement savings because those are incentivized through tax savings. Step 7, like I said, is where you can then start thinking about the 3-bucket strategy where you want to have your tax deferred, you want to have your tax free, and then of course you want to have your after tax because that is going to be your bridge account that a lot of FIRE folks are going to use to retire early we pay respect to that.
Yep.
So I don't know that I do think it changes. I think you just have to make sure, because he's 26 right now.
26.
There's a lot of earning potential. There's a lot of money that's going to be invested between 26 to when he's 50 or whenever he said he was going to retire early. So I think that the opportunity has not been passed to build up those after-tax savings in that brokerage account.
I think one of the things that you do get to do, though, is while you are young, I wouldn't start freaking out about it. I wouldn't start worrying, oh, my goodness, am I putting all the money in the perfect pots? And when you get a little bit closer to age 50, when you start closing in on your late 30s and 40s, some of that will begin to coalesce. You'll begin to see where you have deficiencies. Right now, I would just focus on that savings rate, follow the food, get to 25%, and just go through the paces, filling up the financial order of operations. And then as your accounts grow, as your circumstance grows, then you can start focusing more on asset location and which buckets you're funding at which levels. At 26, just sock it away, and you will not regret it.
Hey, two closing points. By the way, if you want the free deliverable on this, go to moneyguy.com/resources. We actually have this 9-step process completely free to you. The second thing, because you just triggered, when you are saving, don't overcomplicate this, because I can tell a financial mutant, look at indexed target retirement funds from like a Vanguard, a Fidelity. Those things are going to serve you well also, just to make sure you are building and maximizing that army of dollar bills.
Love it, love it, love it. All right, let's ask sort of a nitty-gritty investment question. This is from Peter. Peter said, with bond yields so low, I wonder if there are any smart alternatives for balancing a retirement portfolio that is heavy in stocks. I know just the other week, Bo mentioned that bonds still have a place in your portfolio, even with yields down, but I was unfortunately busy at work and wasn't as tuned in as I would have preferred. All right, Peter, we're going to give you another go-round at this question. Yeah, we're in a low interest rate environment, right? And we all know, we do this all the time, that when it comes to fixed income or bonds, when interest rates rise, the value of current bonds go down. When interest rates drop, the value of current bonds go up. So generally speaking, you want to hold bonds when interest rates are high and likely to drop, because you'll get some capital appreciation on those bonds. You want to be clever in how you hold bonds. Notice I didn't say you don't want to hold bonds. You want to be clever in how you hold your fixed income when interest rates are low and it seems that they might rise. Now, his question was different, though. His question wasn't specifically about bonds. His question was, hey, are there alternatives I ought to think about inside of my portfolio to replace fixed income? That's a really, really nuanced question. So when it comes to like investment return, there are really two components to investment return. The first is the one that we all think of. It's capital appreciation. I buy something for $10 today and tomorrow it's worth $12. My capital is appreciated $2. I've got some growth in there. But the other component of return is income, right? If I own something, or I have a cash account and I own it and I get interest paid to me, I get these payments, this income that's generated from it. Well, one of the things that generally happens is that if you're looking for sort of the risk off or the conservative or the fixed income or the bond portion of your portfolio, what you're really doing is you're focusing on that stable asset base with an income component. So his question, are there alternatives? I would look at other types of investments that might generate income in the portfolio and hold a stable asset base. And there are certainly options out there.
Yeah, I get nervous because I will tell you, for our clients, we do try to go, there's some balancing between bonds, equities, and then we do have asset categories that kind of fit in between there. I don't, because we don't do product recommendations on this show, and I don't feel completely comfortable sharing all of that, because first of all, I don't think the SEC would love us sharing that type of stuff, and our biggest thing is to help you focus on the key fundamental things as you're growing. This is, higher level stuff when you're trying to balance out income, appreciation, but also giving you stability in your portfolio. If you're getting to the point where you need to graduate beyond index target retirement funds, it might be time to talk to somebody. And I know that's such a punt answer to the question, but it really is, because I'm telling you guys, when you get closer that you're nervous about this type of nuanced thing, you don't know what you don't know. Mm-hmm. And we're also in such a unique time. I mean, Warren Buffett, in his most recent letter to shareholders that we'll be covering shortly, he talked about what an uphill battle that bond investors will have in the coming decades. But I want to counter that a little bit. I mean, I completely agree. I'm not going against the oracle whatsoever. But here's the part that we don't know, the timing of it all. Because every central banker in the world right now, because of the crazy balance sheets that all of our governments have done, they are artificially keeping interest rates low on purpose. And if you would have told me last year that the typical bond investor in 2020 would have probably made over 7 to 10%, I'd be like, are you
That's crazy.
crazy?
You would
How
never
is
thought
that
it possible.
possible? And nobody else in the market knew it either, because the pandemic hit, interest rates went backwards to where there's even places in the world right now that you have negative interest rates. I don't know that there's going to be any hurry for many central bankers to push those rates up to that would have that huge negative impact. But I don't think people will know when that's going to happen. I'm just telling you, just realize this is more complex than us. So know what the value of the bond is in your specific portfolio. Focus on what you can control and then build around it. And that might require some customization. I hate answering a question with a question, but I think when you get to sophistication, it's important.
And I think it's pretty personalized. I mean, even your account structure, whether you have a lot in pre-retire or pre-tax assets versus after-tax assets, will affect the type of alternative exposure you might utilize to satisfy that risk-off piece of your portfolio. But what we're saying is there certainly are options out there that you can utilize, but it's not a one-to-one replacement for fixed income. We still stand by fixed income holds a place in most portfolios, especially well-diversified portfolios for people who are mature in their wealth-building life cycle. And so just because interest rates are low, I would not allow that to push me further out on the risk spectrum than I should be.
Yeah, and pay attention to duration too, because shorter term is probably better in the coming years.
Yep. All right, here's another one. This is another kind of academic one. This is from Zumba Elena. I bet she does Zumba. Just a shot. Question.
She might teach Zumba.
Maybe she teaches Zumba. Hey, you should accept Solar 401k. Love it. How does 401k withdrawal rule work if the market tanks? We get this question all the time. Say you have $1 million, and next year it's worth $500,000. Which one of those balances do you draw 4% from? Is it the million or is it the 500? I actually love this question because this is one of the fallacies I feel like I see in the in retirement circles all over the place. They get so caught up on this idea of the withdrawal rate. We think, in our opinion, the withdrawal rate should be the thing that lets you cast vision on the portfolio that you're building towards. When it actually comes time to distribute, your withdrawal rate is something that you should monitor as you move through retirement to make sure that you don't get out of whack. This may be surprising to a lot of you, but for the majority of retirees, they don't have a flat, static withdrawal rate that stays at exactly 3.27% every month or every year or every couple of years. Rather, it's much more fluid than that, because what ends up happening is when we retire, often our expenses are fluid. We have some level of fixed expenses, but then we might have to do home improvements or buy cars, or we want to travel, or we have these things that might cause our annual year-over-year withdrawal rate to kind of go up or down. So the first thing I would say is it's not something quite so static. Here's the second thing I would say that I think is really, really interesting, specifically in your question. If you are retired and you are drawing off of your portfolio, and you're in a portfolio that this year is worth $1 million and next year is worth $500,000, you may have a problem. There may be a risk component inside of your portfolio that you have not taken into consideration. Because I would argue for someone in retirement living off of the assets, a 50% swing in portfolio value is probably less than ideal.
Well, you're bumping into what's called risk capacity, because we know a good diversified portfolio, you hit even a great recession type downturn, you're probably going to be back to making money within 2 to 3 years. Sure. Whereas if you're too far out on the risk spectrum and you're actually living off these assets, it might take 6 to 7 years to actually recover. That's just too long if you're pulling off, because you will eat your corpus alive if that's the case. I want to answer the question in a little different way, in the fact that I like, when I'm doing retirement planning, to do a goals-based retirement plan that is influenced by not only a safe withdrawal rate, but also the Monte Carlo simulations, as well as your personal living expenses. So you get the freedom, if it's goal-based, if you have a big goal that, you have your travel wish list that you want to go to Australia for 3 weeks this coming year because you felt all locked down for the last year because of the pandemic, I want that built in. Now, that might be the travel expenses of the next, of the equivalent of what would be normally 4 years.
Sure.
But if it's goal-based planning based upon your actual living expenses plus what you've built into the plan, it's going to be much more dynamic and actually be able to absorb what's going on and reflect you better than just a static percentage that you're using kind of in the early stages of building wealth. I think if you're in your 20s, 30s, 40s, use the safe withdrawal rate to do the napkin planning to see where you are in your retirement savings. But if you actually get to the future and you're close to retirement, you're kind of skipping some steps by just using that. It's not very dynamic, and you run into these weird situations where you're like, well, if it rained last Thursday and the market went down, how does that impact? The answer is look, the reality is us humans, we're very emotional creatures. I will tell you from my experience of managing money I'm in my third decade. People, when markets are making money, you're going to kick it up a notch. You just naturally, and that's what I like about a goals base is you're testing that to make sure that you're not getting out over your skis on your spending. When markets go down, naturally the human emotion is you're not even spending your 4.5% to 5% safe withdrawal rate because you're all nervous, you're scared. That's why the economies typically tank in tandem with some other economic downturn, and the fact that we all quit buying washing machines, we all quit buying cars, we all quit going on vacations at the same time. It kind of is a pile-on effect, and that's what causes these market cycles. Have a dynamic plan that takes into account and is good through all cycles of what's going on in the economic market. And that's the big part of a retirement plan. I'm amazed when I see comments where people tell me they're running their retirement plan with total market index like at 100%, but they're having a 2 or 3 year cash reserves, and they're thinking that's all they need in their diversification, because you just don't know what you don't know on how scary it is when the market gets its teeth kicked in, and you know that there's some point in the future you're going to have to go pull off of those assets, and you can't just go work more, because that's what happens when you're truly retired. It's on more of your army of dollar bills than it is on your back, your brains, and your hands. That's a scary psychological dynamic. Make sure your portfolio reflects where you are from a risk standpoint too, because it's not always the nuts and bolts of what the math tells you to do. It's also balancing out the important parts of the behavioral side of things.
Love it, love it, love it. All right, this question is from Nate. He said, speaking of saving for retirement, I don't know what part of the show that he actually put that question in there, but I think we're always speaking of saving for retirement. If I can invest in both a Roth IRA and an HSA, which investment choices, parentheses, growth stocks, index funds, dividend stocks, should I make in each for maximum tax benefit? So he's actually asking a really interesting question here. One, should the options that I use inside of an HSA and Roth be similar or different? And two, what types of holdings does it make sense to hold in those types of accounts?
Well, first of all, they're two different accounts. Now, I love that they both have tax-free growth opportunities, but they are completely different accounts, meaning the Roth, from day one, it's supposed to be a retirement account. And it's also a tax-free growth retirement account. So you want to hit the government hard in a legal way by maximizing growth. What I do is I typically use index funds that are either like a total market index, an S&P 500. You even put some international in there. But you do need to always be very aware that the blessing of long-term growth can also be a curse in the fact that if you're too aggressive, you don't get to deduct the loss.
That's right.
So don't go so far out on the risk spectrum that you're speculating within your Roth IRA and losing money, because that's not the same as investing in an aggressive way. So be very mindful of that. HSAs are a little different. We know that 96% of people use HSAs as just clearing accounts.
As an intra-year slush fund.
Just clearing account for your medical expenses. I think it's only 4% are using it where they're actually building enough balance that they're then taking the money and investing it so they can truly maximize the triple tax advantage impact. If you know that there's not a portion of that money that's going to be used for medical expenses in the near term, I'm okay if you are, because I will tell you my HSA, I buy index funds
Yep.
within it because I
Love
am keeping receipts, getting reimbursement years in the future after my army of dollar bills and my HSA have built up. But I think if you are using it as a slush fund, you need to make sure you're balancing that need for what's coming, because just because it's in an HSA doesn't mean you suspend what's long-term versus short-term in your analysis.
And look, I'm probably a little overly conservative in this. One of the things that I do inside of my HSA is we end up maxing it out every year, and I put the dollars to work. And I too use index funds, just sort of broad market exposure. I do leave enough in my HSA to cover my deductible.
Yeah.
So even though I don't actually ever dip into those funds, I just kind of like having it there. I think that's not a horrible thing to do. One, it allows you to immediately satisfy step one of financial operations, but I just leave that amount in cash should I ever need to get to it for some specific reason, and then I invest the rest across broad index funds. Now, if you had like just something to think about, and this hit me right now, they're both tax-free intended accounts. Like they should be tax-free. You said something interesting that got my mind racing. The Roth starts that way. The HSA ends that way, assuming that you have qualified medical expenses. But let's say that you decided, oh man, I know that this stock, I'm going to make one up, is just going to kill it. It's going to go up, I don't know, like maybe it's going to make 1,000% in 1 year. You ever heard of a stock that do that?
That's speculating, though.
No, I'm saying you would never do that. But if you were going to hold a growth asset or a growth portfolio or a growth mutual fund or something that you thought had a lot of growth potential, I would err towards holding that in the Roth as opposed to the HSA. Yep. Because, remember, after 65, if you don't have medical expenses, HSA can turn into a closet retirement account, but you do have to pay ordinary income tax when you pull the money out. Roth stays tax-free forever. So in terms of like how you think about the risk profile of those two buckets, I would make that slight differentiation.
I do, because I like just nerding out, and we like, playing like we're like, a rhythm band. I was thinking Fish, or Widespread Panic, something like that. And the fact that what I also like is that thinking from a tax deduction, because I love what you just said about, Roth is where you really go to stick it on the growth assets. Also, in the short term, don't forget the deductibility. What's great about HSAs is that you get the tax deduction on your contribution to those accounts as well, whereas the Roth is always after tax with the contribution. Right. So really powerful stuff there. I like that. We hit that hard.
You want to answer an unanswerable question? Or you want me to just skip over that one?
I mean, I'd like to hear what the unanswerable question is.
This is from Wombat Joe, which is just an amazing name.
Oh, man, he probably has a tiki bar.
He says,
makes some probably painkillers by the beach.
If he does have a tiki bar, then this is going to be a hilarious question, because this tiki bar's done very well. Because my company is about to go IPO.
Okay.
That means it's about to go public. There's going to be an initial.
He's selling his painkiller mix.
That's right. And it will be half my net worth. Okay, how fast and how much should I sell? Drop to 10% of my portfolio immediately, so as soon as I can sell, I hear you guys say that. Drop to 25% over 6 months. And he didn't write this. I'm saying, hey, Munez, give me a prescription for exactly how I should approach this.
So, Wombat Joe, first of all, love your painkillers. Just the right mix of coconut with the pineapple. But no, in reality, here's the thing. His situation, because it is answerable, but it's answerable for a client.
Sure.
Because I will tell you, look, we don't want you to have your working capital as well as your investment capital all tied up to the exact same company, because that is a recipe for disaster if things go horrible. But it happens all the time. I mean, we work with executives. We work with people who have just tons of RSUs, stock options, and other things. And if you followed this is why you have to be careful giving just broad-based advice, is because somebody who has 7 figures of these things, because they are in an executive position, it's practically impossible for them to unload all of the assets to get it down to 10%. And truthfully, it might not even be practical from what's in their best interest for building a retirement plan or financial independence. So I hate, once again, answering a question with a question, but I think that this is one of those very personalized, very special situations where you're working through a dynamic plan. For some people, it might make sense to, immediately you go liquidate 90%. especially if it was just a few $1,000s,
Sure.
because you don't want to have that risk. But for somebody who's got such a concentration, you got to be a little more dynamic. You got to be a little more creative. You got to take a lot more financial planning into account to get to the correct answer for that individual.
I love it. I agree with that answer wholeheartedly. Can I say something just a little bit different?
Yeah.
I
It was
think
an unanswerable question.
It's an unanswerable, so that means I can do that. One of the things that I think is really interesting is that most often when we make financial decisions, we are comfortable not being 100% right so long as we can assure ourselves that we're not going to be 100% wrong. Well, one of the things when you work for a company and you put in your blood and your sweat and your tears and the company's done well, you probably have a lot of confidence that company's going to continue to do well.
Yeah.
You've put in the hard work, and there's a good chance that it might. A lot of companies will go IPO and the company will still advance and will still grow and will still progress. And likely it would be rewarding for you to be a shareholder, for you to be an owner, for you to have that exposure as the company grows. So one of the things that I love talking to my executive clients about when they have this sort of thing happen is, just like we never like to take a lump sum of cash and just dump it in the market all at once, because there's a chance we could be right, there's a chance we could be wrong, we like to dollar cost average it in. We like to slowly and steadily ease it in.
On life-changing
On big
lump sums.
life-changing
Yeah.
sums. Well, if this IPO amount is a big life-changing sum and you're going to have this exposure, you already mentioned, you got to take into account the tax situation.
Great point.
But I love the idea of divesting your exposure systematically if it makes sense for you to do that. So that way, every month, you are capturing some of that growth, capturing some of that opportunity, decreasing your exposure. But as the company, as the stock does well, you still participate in some of that growth. Now, what this requires is likely some dynamic divesting. So maybe I want to start by selling $20,000 a month, but if the stock keeps going up, I might want to increase that to $40,000 or $50,000. Or you have to figure out the numbers that make sense for you. I like removing the emotion from it because this will happen, guaranteed, every time. If you say, I'm going to sell 90% of it the day that it becomes available, stock market's going to open that morning. You'll be like, well, do I sell it now or do I sell it well, the market's down a little bit. I'm going to wait. I'm going to do it this afternoon. Well, it's up. It's going to keep going up. And it just becomes an incredibly emotional decision. So if you can put some parameters around removing the emotion, it's going to set you up better for long-term success, in my opinion.
I completely concur.
I love it. All right, this next question is from Bruce Bambasaro. It's a really cool name, Bruce. He says, hey, good morning, Brian Bowe. Question on emergency fund savings. In addition to 3 to 6 months of expenses, how much should we float for recurring monthly expenses? I'm going to reframe this question a little bit because I think this is what he's asking, and I only want us to answer this because I've done this wrong so many times. I think you've matured past it. But I do this. I recently did this wrong, and I've changed my ways. So I'm a proponent of like the two-account cash approach, where I've got a checking account and I have my savings account. And I keep all of my emergency reserves, my 3 to 6 months, in my savings account, but I also leave a buffer and some cushion in the checking account. I think what he's asking is how much of a buffer of a cushion should I leave in my checking account? Because I think the tendency for financial mutants is to try to maximize every single penny. And so they know that I want exactly 6 months of expenses, and I want to have exactly that amount in the highest yield savings I can get it in, and not in the checking account paying me nothing. His question is that a good idea, or perhaps how should I better approach that decision?
What's funny is I do think us financial mutants, we all are wired very similarly, and that we want to, maximization is so important to us.
Yep.
And so that's what probably your clearing bank account is paying you nothing. So that's the account that you're writing the checks, paying your bills out of. Especially if it's a local brick and mortar, they're not going to pay you anything. So you're trying to keep that thing as lean as possible to get your money, your savings, over into that high yield account to maximize each dollar. So you're right. So you're trying to figure out how much float do I keep in my clearing account. Here's the way I do it. And look, when I was younger, and I think, Bo, you're graduating through this, I kept that thing super lean. So lean to a point that it was dangerous, because that's how you get those knuckleheaded bank transaction fees where you have to call and say, put your hat in your hand and go, ho hum, sorry, screwed up. Can you refund me the $35 overdraft fee and all these other things? It just creates a lot of headache for yourself. So what I've actually created, it's crazy how my brain does create systems just automatically.
Yep.
I look at my monthly expenses and I ask myself, what is the most expensive check or expense that will be drafted out of my account each month? If your mortgage is your most expensive expense, use that. Or if you like invest on the 15th and it's, $6,000 a month, use that number. Whatever the biggest pull off of your account is each month, use that as at least your baseline, because there's probably enough spread between the next time there's a big pull. If you always keep at least that minimum amount, you run a much less likelihood that you'll run into a knuckleheaded decision that causes you the embarrassment of running that account to zero.
Yeah, because then you have to call the bank and say, hey, my account got overdrafted, but I promise I'm not broke. No, look at my savings account. And they'll tell you, oh, we'll just link them and it'll protect you. I do the same thing. For me personally, because I've screwed this up so often, I do more than just that one biggest. I do about a month of what I know my automatic withdrawal, because I know by the time that the next pay cycle hits, it'll replenish. So I know the things that come out automatically. I just leave that much in there. And then by the time,
you leave 1 month of income in then?
It's not really a month of income. It's a month of automatic withdrawals. So
Okay.
not including like payments that I manually make, but stuff I know, like automatic savings or, 529 contribution, whatever the thing is that flows out, whatever the things that are set to happen automatically. Because then I know there's some manual stuff like writing checks, and so that kind of floats me a little bit.
Well, I think, because here's another thing, because just you saying that makes me think of another facet that we do need to take into account. If you are doing a joint account that there's two or more than two people spending out of the same account, but you're the funder of it, make sure you know what the behavior of your partner that's also pulling off that account. Because I imagine that's having some influence on that as well. So
Venmo, you silly, silly Venmo. That's a great segue, way to set that one up, tee it up for me. This is from Kevin. Kevin said, hey, how do you know when to combine finances? We've been married for 3 years, and we're doing fine. Is there a reason to do so, or simply just make each other dependents on the other's account? Should we bring finances together? He's asking two questions, I think. Should we bring finances together is first question. Second question, should we bring accounts together?
Yeah, look, we've covered this before, but I think it's always an important one. It really depends. I think the default answer is I want you to be a combined household, but I also understand there's some caveats to that. If you're a later marriage, a second or third marriage, there's going to be some differences there on meaning that you might be bringing in assets, or maybe you come from family money, or you have family resources that have been provided to you. Those type of situations, because there is some legal protections there, that I think we always have to pay respect that those accounts might need to be separate so that they save their legal protections. I do like the thought, though, that once a couple is married, you open a joint account together, you have all the income sources for that couple flow into that joint account, and that is the account that y'all start making together. Then it's easier. Like if you come into the marriage both broke, then there's no reason that y'all should have separate accounts, because I think in the long term that could create some weird dynamics within the relationship. Especially if one is making a lot more than the other, you never want to get into a type of situation. I know in my house, we are never, ever, ever, and I would never do this to my wife, talk about who makes the money.
Sure.
Because I think that is a very disrespectful thing to the dynamic of the marriage and the respect within the relationship and the love in the relationship. So it's better for me to have all the money come into one account so we can treat it as a duo and we can make joint decisions on it, because because I am the financial guy of the household doesn't mean that I should be. It's not an authoritarian type relationship where I get to tell my wife what to do. We all know who the boss is. I mean, my wife is the boss, so there's no reason to create some weird power structure there. So I do like, if you're married, have a joint account. You can pay, respect to the legal dynamics of if you come into the relationship with assets that need to be separated. But I do think income coming into the relationship should go into a joint account, and y'all should manage that together.
But perhaps you decide to do it separately, because we have clients who do that. If you decide to keep your account separate, we do think you should have one solid goal in place, one financial plan in place, that even if you have multiple accounts, you both are working towards these same common goals. If you say, hey, I've got my accounts and I'm doing my thing, and you have your accounts and you're doing your thing, there's a thing you're going to be really inefficiently allocated, both from an investment risk standpoint as well as from a tax standpoint. So if you can at least take into consideration all of the household accounts, you're going to start on much more solid footing. But I agree with you, Brian. I think bringing it together jointly makes a lot of sense where possible.
And then I would say walk a mile in somebody else's shoes. If you're the one that makes in the relationship, you're the one that makes more money, put yourself in your spouse's situation and think of how you'd feel emotionally if you had to go to that spouse every time you need money. It's just not the greatest thing in the world. Sure. And I think that just be healthy about that, because it's these type of things that I think creep into a relationship and can create and kind of, create, essentially you're turning a scratch into something that gets infected.
Sure.
And then it festers, and then it could really create a much bigger problem in the relationship if you don't address it on the front end.
This next question is from Carrie. Carrie said, this is from YouTube. I recently rolled over an old 401k to an IRA. It sold the old assets and moved as cash. Do I need to dollar cost average it into a new investment? And I think or lump sum. So I had a 401k that was invested. 401k company sold it, transferred cash. How should I approach putting that money back to work? Do I dollar cost average it, or do I lump sum invest it?
Wow, what a great, what, it's funny is that we know this because we do this all the time, but I don't remember I've ever answered this question on a Q&A show, and this is a great question because we do talk about lifetime. If you get a huge chunk of money that is life-changing money, you should dollar cost average it. But there is a component in this situation that is not respected in that, in the fact that this money was fully invested only because there's a change of custodians or the account structure, that it was liquidated and then rolled over in cash form. Should you now dollar cost average it? I think the answer is no. You have to look at where the source funds came from, and the fact that if this was another 401k that's now into an IRA rollover, put that money to work, because it was fully invested when it was in the 401k. Put it to work now in the IRA. Don't let the lump sum. It's a lot different than somebody who sold a business.
Sure.
Or it's a lot different if somebody sold a big chunk of land or they won the lottery.
Yep.
That money, the source is completely different than when it's coming from a rollover asset.
Or even if you're someone who is retiring and perhaps you got a pension payout, right? So it was these pensionable funds, and then it comes to as a big lump sum. I'd argue that falls into the life-changing sum category, where dollar cost averaging likely makes sense, because in a pension it was a defined benefit, not necessarily invested at your discretion. It's a little bit different. I agree completely. If it comes from fully invested posture, it should return to a fully invested posture.
You never know what question you're going to get in a Q&A, because that's a great nuanced question that we deal with things like that all the time.
Carrie, he really liked your question. This next one is from Bill. He said, potentially retiring, and then parentheses, or being retired this year. Tips or suggestions on things to ensure I don't drop the ball my last year of working. So I'm thinking about entering into retirement, or potentially I'm going to enter into retirement. Are there things I ought to be thinking about, or maybe, I don't know, shows I should go listen to?
Well, that's exactly what I was going to say. We just did a show on, we actually have a checklist. Is that checklist on our deliverables page?
The retirement checklist?
Yeah, the retirement checklist. It's on the deliverables. Yep. Yeah. Go to moneyguy.com/resources. We actually have a checklist for things you should consider before you retire. And we don't mind sharing a few of those things, but I think the biggest things, and I'll talk in broad sense, is to make sure you actually know what you're retiring to.
That's a big one.
We talk, we always talk about that, because I think so many of us financial mutants, we're savers, we build, we're creators, and then we don't know how to be spenders. We don't know how to enjoy ourselves outside of the workforce, because the workforce has defined us for so long. So definitely know what you're retiring to.
Yeah, I was going to say one of the best things, and we encourage all of our folks to do this. You should test drive retirement in your last year or couple years of working. So whatever you think you're going to live off of in retirement, your year immediately before retirement or a few years before retirement, you ought to make sure your household actually can live off of that sum. If there are hobbies you think you want to pursue in retirement, you should find a way to begin pursuing some of those hobbies before retirement to see if you actually like that. You may say, hey, I want to learn how to surf when I retire. Well, if you've never been to the beach before and all of a sudden you go to the beach your first day of retirement and turns out you hate salt water, maybe surfing is not going to be your thing. So if you can start test driving some of that stuff, it's going to make the transition, a likely once-in-a-lifetime transition, move much more smoothly. All right, this next question is from Benjamin. Benjamin said, my company has a 401k program, but I don't like the options. We should even talk about that for a moment. Most don't beat inflation. One tracks the S&P. And she goes, to set up an account on my own, I can make my own choices, and it costs $200 a year. Is it worth it? So it sounds like Benjamin has a 401k that has what's called a self-directed investment option. He can go open a brokerage account and choose his own investments from the whole investment universe, but there's a $200 a year annual fee. Is it worth it for Benjamin to do that, and what things should he think about?
Well, there's a very easy break-even analysis that Benjamin could do, is that you just said something that was very important there. As you said, you don't like the investment options that are in your current plan because they're too expensive. You could go figure out what does it cost, the internal operating expenses plus whatever commissions or fees that whoever has structured your retirement plan charges, and then go do an apples-to-apples analysis with the brokerage link or the self-directed option, so that you can see, now look, they might have a fee still associated with it, so pay attention to any fees that are tied to that above and beyond the $200, like if there's an assets under management or something like that. But do an apples-to-apples analysis, and whatever that spread is, you can then divide that by whatever the account balance is and figure out where you break even. And if your account is bigger than that, you can very easily see if you've paid the $200.
Absolutely. One of the cautionary tales I would say, though, because we see this a lot, is people say, oh, man, the investment options on my 401k aren't good. I'm going to go open up this brokerage account, and then they lose their mind. They start buying all kinds of crazy stuff inside the account. Just because you have access to everything, doesn't mean you need to go start buying, triple levered ETFs in your 401k. That's probably not a prudent investment strategy for you. So before you do it, have an idea of what it is you're looking for. Oh, I am looking for low-cost index funds, broad diversification, not trying to go day trade penny stocks inside of my retirement account.
I do have one key component, though, that I want to make sure is not lost. We have people all the time come to us with cruddy retirement plans, and I always think of I was going to say a country song, but I'll just keep it simple in the fact that sometimes you have to love the one you're with, and the fact that if their employer has a match, I'm talking about free money, guys. I'm talking about you either make 50% or 100% if they do a dollar-for-dollar match. That's guaranteed rate of return to do the match. So I don't care how bad or stinky the investment options are. If you have free employer money, don't sit on the sidelines just because you're annoyed that their golf person hooked them up with a bad retirement plan. Because we see that situation. Take advantage of that free money. There's definitely a lot of benefits to doing an employer plan, even if it has bad investment options.
Yeah, I mean, if you take the free money plus the potential tax savings, you can overcome high expenses and poor investment options. You just got to, again, like you said, you got to break out the spreadsheet and do the analysis. All right, this is from, this isn't a real word. It's from a guy. This is a YouTube comment. I'm just going to tell it. He says,
does that mean it's an explicit nature of their name if you read it out loud? Go ahead. No, don't try to do it. Go ahead.
I'm 42 and earn too much to contribute to a Roth IRA. I have a rollover IRA, but my wife only has a Roth IRA. Can I do backdoor Roth just for my wife, or does my IRA impact the Roth conversion? That's a great question.
That is a great question. Here's the cool thing about Roth conversion strategies. The government, even though you're a married household, the government treats IRA and retirement accounts as you are separate individuals, meaning that, think about it, when you do your tax return, the way you even let the government know about your IRAs is there's a form that you should be filing with your taxes, by the way, but a lot of tax preparers don't do it. It's called Form 8606 that will show your history with your retirement accounts and the basis, if there is any, how much is pre-tax and so forth. So yes, the short answer is without a doubt, you have IRA assets like a rollover IRA, and since there's a pro rata rule to doing Roth conversions, meaning you could contribute to the traditional IRA, but when it came time to turn it into a Roth, a lot of it would turn out to be taxable because you have these IRA rollover assets as of 12/31 of the previous year. That blows it up. It doesn't necessarily work for you, but your wife has zero IRA assets except her existing Roth IRA. She is a perfect candidate where you make a traditional IRA contribution and then you can convert it to a Roth IRA, and there should not be any tax consequences because you go pay it with after-tax, non-deductible contributions, and then converting it. She has no other IRA assets, so the pro rata rule doesn't impact it. It's perfect.
Yeah, one of the things I'm amazed by that I feel like sometimes we just forget to sometimes share things that are sort of second nature to us. If you are married and your spouse does not work and does not generate income, they can still make IRA contributions so long as you make over $12,000 or $14,000, depending on your age, per year. So you can actually do a spousal IRA contribution, even for a spouse that doesn't work. I'm amazed at how often I talk to a prospect or a client, and they're like, "Oh no, my wife doesn't work; they can't do that." I'm like, "No, your spouse can do that. They can contribute based on your work record, based on your earnings," which I think is really neat.
But I will tell you, from income limitations, like even seeing if you're eligible for Roth, even though your spouse can make contributions even if they don't have earned income, they look at your household income. So do be aware of where those income limits are.
This next question is from Lori. Lori says, I have a modest rollover IRA that I'd like to convert to Roth funds. I'm in my early 40s and figure it would be worth it if I have 20 or more years for it to grow. What's the best way to do that? Well, one, most custodians make Roth conversions pretty easily. They actually have an option when you do a distribution from your IRA rollover to your Roth. It'll say, hey, are you doing a Roth conversion? Great. Do you want to withhold any taxes? Our thought is no, you don't want to withhold the taxes. You want to pay with outside money to be able to do that. But this is the question that I think you really have to answer, Lori, as to whether this makes sense. When you do a Roth conversion, you're going to pay income tax on that. So if you are in a lower tax bracket and you can pay taxes in one of the lower brackets right now, and that money can grow for the next 20, 30, 40, perhaps it does make sense for you. But only if, when you get to retirement, when you get later on, your tax rate is higher. If your tax rate is the same, odds are it's going to be a wash. It will neither have been more advantageous or less advantageous to do the conversion. Conversions make sense where there's an arbitrage opportunity. Now, there are other estate planning thoughts that you can have as it relates to Roth, but that's really the thing you have to figure out is where I am now going to be higher or lower from an income tax bracket perspective than where I think I'll be when I actually go to pull these dollars out.
Yeah, I think it actually, now the key hurdle is you have to have outside assets. I don't want you using corpus to pay the taxes because that blows up the whole thought process. I think it's a pretty easy decision if you're in that low 12% tax bracket to consider that, because even if you add your state income taxes to 12%, that's probably a still historically low tax rate to consider. But when you get into higher tax brackets, meaning like you get into, I want to say like the 24, and then you add the state income tax on top of it, your marginal rates are now getting well into the 30% range. And the thought is when you retire, yes, you'll be in a lower tax bracket, and a lot of states don't even charge you state income tax on your retirement distributions if you're in one of those favored tax states. You've got to take all that into account. So it's definitely one of those things. Make sure you have enough outside assets. Make sure you're in those lower income tax brackets to where it is justifiable to do the Roth conversion now. If you check those boxes, have at it. I think it's a great thing.
I think that was your question. If your question was actually about logistics, most of them will allow you to do it online. But if you're ever nervous, call. If you're at a Vanguard or Fidelity or Schwab or fill in the blank, call the provider, the custodian that houses your assets, and ask them for the process. It'll either be an electronic thing online or some paperwork you have to fill out. But you don't want to screw it up. And make sure that when you do this, you notify your tax preparer, or if you self-prepare, you understand the right ways to do that on your tax return and reflect it so that it's taxed in the appropriate manner. This next question is from Mary. She says, would you recommend a target retirement index fund in a taxable brokerage account or just in tax-deferred and tax-advantaged accounts. It sounds like Mary has heard us talk about tax location and some of the benefits that exist there. So her question is, well, does it make sense to hold that in a taxable account because of the types of holdings that it has?
Yeah, I think while you're saving and starting out, I'm talking about accounts before you really get to 400,000 to 500,000 in assets, total assets. I'm talking about all your buckets together. Yeah, don't sweat the small stuff. Don't outsmart yourself. Focus on an index target retirement fund in all the different pots. I'm okay if you're buying that in your Roth IRA. I'm okay if you're buying it in your after tax. I'm okay if you're buying it in your 401k and even HSA on the assets that you're letting work.
Yep.
Where it runs into issues is once you graduate past, you get to $500, $600 million in assets. Yeah, you want to graduate beyond index target retirement funds because now you need a little more customization. You're a little more sophisticated where you want to be able to harvest losses in your taxable accounts. You want to be able to do charitable contributions and really hit the most appreciated assets that you can give away. You want to start focusing on the bucket strategy of asset location, of putting, like your tax deferred, your ordinary income producing assets like bonds and your tax deferred, your growth assets in your Roth, and then your dividend paying and your liquid assets in your after tax. All that comes into place in the sophistications there, but don't sweat that stuff until you built up a level. And that's where, guys, this is why I love the beauty of what we've created here with the Money Guy Show. We know we give it away to you with the advice, because when you get to all those things I just mentioned on when you've outgrown the index target retirement funds, that's where the abundance cycle comes in. You're going to say, holy cow, there's a lot more stuff than I ever thought would need to go into this, what is perceived as a simple decision. Maybe I need a co-pilot, and that's when hopefully you'll consider working with a financial advisor, and we work with people all across the country.
I love it, love it, love it, love it. All right, this question is from Gabe Morell. He says, what kind of investment strategy would you recommend for cash savings beyond an emergency fund? I've avoided allocating, What kind of investment strategy would you recommend for cash beyond an emergency fund? This would go towards larger life purchases, such as a car, a wedding, house upgrades, etc. So I've got my emergency fund, my 3 to 6 months. But there's some other stuff I want to save for. Down payment on a house or a wedding or a car. Where should I park that cash, and how should I think about growing that money until I make that purchase?
I mean, if the money is needed within 3 to 5, less than 3 to 5 years, it's going to be boring. It's going to be a high yield savings account.
Yep.
I mean, I hate to say it. I mean, because we all are the anemic interest rates that we're all making on our savings, but I can tell you guys, it's important to have that liquidity. Sure. I mean, because opportunities will also come about. I mean, I get picked on because I keep a little extra cash.
Why are you looking at me like I'm the one that picks on you?
You pick on me. But then notice when we've had opportunities that pop up on big life decisions.
Cash has been helpful.
Man, it is just, I feel like a little mini Warren Buffett, because if you have enough liquidity, it doesn't mean that you hoard enough cash that you're jeopardizing how much you're saving for long-term success.
Yep.
That 25% or greater. But there is nothing wrong with keeping some liquidity to be powder money for striking when opportunities are awesome. That's an important thing that I think is not talked about as well. But unfortunately, I think you're probably going to be in a high yield savings if it's anything from 3 to 5 years. Now, once you get past 5 years, this is where Bo kind of gets excited, because this is where he picks on me about mortgages and other things. Put that money to work.
That's it. I have people ask all the time, hey, I want to save for a new car, but I don't know when I'm going to need it. I love my car, but I don't know if I'm going to replace it in 3 years or 4 years or 5 years. Or, hey, I really want to save for a wedding for my kids, but they just can't get it together. I keep waiting because I'm ready for kids, I'm ready for in-laws, and I'm ready for grandbabies, and I'm saving, but I don't know exactly when it's going to happen. We love, when it comes to building for longer intermediate term goals like that, there's nothing wrong with a very conservative dollar cost averaging strategy to do that. One of the things we'll talk about is, just like we recommend target retirement funds, you don't have to call them target retirement funds. You can call them target date funds, meaning if you think that you might have something that's going to happen in the next 10 years, there's nothing wrong with dollar cost averaging into a target date fund that's 10 years out. Even though it doesn't tie to your retirement, it might tie to when that specific money might be needed. We see grandparents do this all the time for grandchildren. They'll pick a target index fund that targets age 18 for the kids, not retirement, because it allows it to be more intermediate term money. There's nothing wrong with doing that, but I agree wholeheartedly with Brian. If there's something inside the next 3 to 5 years, cash, as painful as it is in this moment, is king, and it's something that you got to do. Guys, thank you so much for letting us answer these questions for you. Thanks so much for letting us be part of your financial journey. If you've not gone out to the website, go check out moneyguide.com. We have a resource page where you can download our food deliverable, you can download our retirement checklist, you can download the tax spreadsheet, you can download all the things we put out there to help you take your finances to the next level.
Money Guy team, out.